My grandparents renovated and lived in a haunted house for more than 30 years, with interesting consequences. Slow day at work, so I thought I'd share a story about the ghost in my grandparents' house in Mississippi, and how it followed my grandfather to his deathbed. My grandparents bought a haunted house in their small town, and the ghost followed them for the rest of their lives. A little background on my grandparents. I love them very much, but they were problematic. My grandfather was a hotshot Delta lawyer who was a member of the Citizens Council and had countless mistresses and affairs, but also worked furiously to desegregate public schools and defend disenfranchised laborers pro bono. My grandmother was vain and hellish to her maids and staff. They never paid them equally and kept a gun in her car so she could pack heat when she ran down my grandfather's girlfriends and threatened them within an inch of their lives. So, these two dysfunctional people, very much a product of their own times, had 3 children and dominated their little town in Mississippi. They were one of a few wealthy families and wanted to cement their status by buying the oldest and largest house in town, located in the heart of the tiny historic district. The house was a 100-year-old Victorian, the cliché of it all, that had stood empty for 20 years and needed a complete overhaul. New roof, new walls, new insulation, you name it. My grandparents bought the house and lived in a rental for 3 years while they tore out the asbestos and varnished the wood floors, updating the kitchen and landscaping. They quite literally spent millions on furniture and rugs and paintings while waiting for the house to be finished. They moved into the house in 1973, and the first night they were there, they had to call the police twice. Once, when they heard loud footsteps walking up the stairs and stopping outside of the bedroom door, and the other, when the kitchen door slammed shut on the first floor, shaking the floorboards. Basically, they thought someone had snuck in, evaded the police, and was still lurking around. My grandfather stayed awake all night, convinced that someone was hiding in the house. The sound of footsteps walking up the stairs and stopping outside their bedroom door went on every night for 3 months. My grandmother was the first to acknowledge the presence of the ghost. She quickly learned that it didn't like electrical appliances. It had a vendetta against her vacuum cleaner in particular. The long hallway that ran through the center of the house on the first floor was called the gallery, and my grandmother had purchased a massive oriental rug to fill the space, and it required constant cleaning. The electrical outlet was on one end of the hallway, and she would plug the vacuum and start making her way down the gallery. She would never get more than 5 feet down the hall before the vacuum would die, its plug having been ripped out of the socket. She'd go plug it back in, start vacuuming, and a few minutes later, the same thing would have happened. Vacuum would die, plug would be lying on the floor. She always swore that she had plenty of slack in the cord length, and that someone did not approve of the noise of the vacuum. There was always an incident where the toaster in the kitchen went missing for a day and reappeared in the trash can. The children, my dad and aunt and uncle, all claimed that they saw a man in the front parlor looking out the window. To this day, my aunt can't talk about the ghost without tearing up a little from nerves. When they left for college, they mostly never stayed in the house except for holidays. And even then, they elected to stay at a friend's house rather than sleep in that house overnight. One day in the mid-1980s, the niece of the original builder and owner came to town, and my grandparents invited her over to see the renovations on the house. The visit ended up lasting for hours, as the niece, by then very elderly, waxed sentimental on the memories she had of the place and of her uncle. He was a doctor and used the front of the house as his office and exam rooms, but died of a heart attack in the house when he was in his 50s. Apparently he was well loved, and the town turned out for his funeral, which was also held in the house. The niece told my grandparents that his wife always said that he had never left and stayed to look after them. After that visit, things seemed to calm down for the next 6 to 7 years, until I was born. My mom and dad lived in the small town for a few years after my birth, and my grandmother would babysit and keep me overnight when my parents needed a break. I have distinct memories of sleeping in my crib in the upstairs hallway and being checked on by a tall man wearing a vest and long-sleeved white shirt. He'd check his watch and nod before walking away. I brought this up to my grandmother when I was a teenager. She absolutely lost it and went into a meltdown about how ghosts aren't real and that I was making it up to upset her. So I never told her about seeing the man walk out of the greenhouse, or how I saw him in the window at the end of the upstairs hallway when playing in the yard. My dad believed me, however, because the man used to check up on him too. He'd be in bed asleep and wake up to the sound of his door opening slowly and then shutting quickly. Once he told me the background story of the builder, I was convinced that it was the ghost of the doctor still making his rounds, checking to see if everyone was okay. I never spoke his name aloud, but in my head I referred to the ghost as Dr. W, his given name, and from then on, I began to notice more instances of bizarre activity in the house. Pillows would be rearranged on sofas. Doors would be left open when they were previously shut. And the dumbwaiter would often raise and fall to different floors on its own accord. But once I left for college, I never saw Dr. W again. My grandparents sold the house, and my grandfather began showing signs of early onset dementia. They built a new house out in the country where he could take walks outside without encountering cars or busy roads. The house they built was massive, but slightly smaller than the old Victorian. They moved in without any problems, but quickly realized that they weren't alone in the house. My grandmother told us that the same things were happening in that house that occurred 40 years ago when they moved into the Victorian. Footsteps on the stairs, kitchen appliances terrorized, doors opening and shutting. The activity calmed down after a few months, but my grandmother swore that she saw shadows moving through the rooms. When my grandfather began his decline, she set up a hospice room for him in the house and hired a nurse to take care of him. He began to see people in the hallway outside of his room. A whole cast of characters. "That man," he once said, pointing at the door, "he's from the house. "What house?" we'd ask. "You know," he'd say, "the doctor." He also saw his mother, a man wearing old-fashioned spectacles, a woman holding a loaf of bread, and his sister. But Dr. W was the one who lingered outside of his door, watching him die. When he did pass, my grandmother felt someone in the room with them, and my grandfather was very agitated. "Not you," he said over and over again. "Go away. Get out." I'm not sure why Dr. W chose to follow my grandparents. Maybe he didn't have a choice. But neither of them ever directly acknowledged the ghost in conversation with me. All of the info I have is from my father and my aunt. If anyone has similar experiences, I would love to hear them. I want to thank you guys for listening to this story, and a special thanks goes out to Careless-Blackberry, who provided this story on the Paranormal Reddit. A link will be placed for Careless-Blackberry and the Paranormal Reddit in the YouTube description below. If you guys enjoyed this video, be sure to hit the like button down below. And if you enjoy scary content like this one, be sure to hit the subscribe button and hit the bell notification so you know when I drop my next video. If you guys have any scary stories that you would like me to create a video about, let me know in the comments down below. Or you can email me at jkpreflor@gmail.com. Lastly, I want to thank Kelly Warrens, my patron on Patreon, for supporting me, and all of you who have bought t-shirts on my Teespring store. For any of you who would like to support this channel, I'd ask that you would consider becoming a patron on Patreon or checking out the Teespring store, as this does help out quite a bit. Alright guys, that'll do it for today's video, but thank you for sticking around, and we will see you in the next one. Peace.